Yeah, our CBS News partners revealing some new GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, tracking the movements of the boat Nolan Wells was on before he disappeared.
The biggest question surrounding Nolan Wells may finally have a new piece of the puzzle. The young woman who was with Nolan during his final confirmed moments on Horn Island has now spoken directly with Nolan's mother. At the same time, GPS records have helped investigators reconstruct the movements of the boat that left the island without him. And the case is now headed toward a grand jury. But there is still one problem. No one has publicly established exactly what happened to Nolan during the roughly 90 minutes between his last confirmed sighting and the moment that boat left Horn Island. That gap is where this investigation continues to live. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a college football player from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, with plans for his future. He had completed his first year at Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he played wide receiver, and he was preparing to return for summer training. Instead, on July 4, 2026, Nolan went with friends to Horn Island, a barrier island roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. It was supposed to be a normal holiday trip. By the end of the night, his family would be searching for him. And 2 days later, Nolan's body would be found in the water. The official cause and manner of death have not been established. That is important, because a lot of information about this case has circulated online as if it were already proven. It is not. So let's start with what the records actually show. Around 3 p.m. on July 4th, Nolan was last confirmed alive on Horn Island. He had been seen speaking with 19-year-old Katie McCormack. Katie's role has received enormous attention because she was one of the last people outside Nolan's immediate friend group known to have spoken with him. For weeks, much of what the public heard about Katie came through other people. Then that changed. According to Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wanley, she and Katie eventually met face-to-face. Christine said Katie's account did not match everything she had previously been hearing. But there is an important distinction here. Katie did not tell Christine that she watched Nolan get onto the boat. According to Christine's account, Katie said Nolan told her that he intended to return to his friends. Katie assumed he would do exactly that. She did not personally see him board the boat. That may sound like a small distinction, but in this case, it is enormous. Because another account says something different. Warren Hudson, one of the friends on the boat, has said Nolan was asked to leave with the group and verbally refused. According to Warren, Nolan said he was staying and planned to get another ride back to the mainland. Those two accounts do not necessarily prove that someone is lying. But they describe an important difference in Nolan's final known moments. Katie's account is that Nolan intended to return. Warren's account is that Nolan deliberately chose to stay. And neither account explains what happened after that. Now comes the GPS data. The boat Nolan had arrived on eventually left Horn Island at approximately 4:31 p.m. That time is significant because it comes roughly 90 minutes after Nolan's last confirmed sighting. And Nolan was not on the boat. The GPS records then show that the boat did not simply return home. It returned to its original departure dock at about 5:44 p.m. after being towed at reduced speed for part of the trip. It later moved into Fort Bayou at 5:52 p.m., returned to the dock around 6:06 p.m., and then traveled to the Fort Bayou boat launch at approximately 7:19 p.m. Those movements matter because they give investigators something that memories cannot provide: a digital record. There is also another piece of evidence that comes directly from the afternoon itself. While the group was still dealing with the boat, someone aboard called for towing assistance because the vessel was taking on water. The dispatch audio later obtained through public records indicates that the boat's pump had failed. That call happened before anyone knew Nolan would not be coming home. So investigators have an independently recorded timeline showing that there really was a boat emergency that afternoon. That does not explain what happened to Nolan, but it is an important part of the timeline. And then the evening became even more concerning. The group returned without Nolan. According to accounts described publicly by his family, no immediate alarm was raised because the friends believed Nolan had remained on the island and planned to return another way. It was shortly after 11 p.m. when one of Nolan's friends called his mother, Christine. That call changed everything. Christine has said that Nolan's friends did not normally call her under those circumstances. She opened a location-sharing application and searched for her son. His phone was not on Horn Island. It was on the mainland, inside a friend's residence. His keys were there too. The phone had made it back. Nolan had not. Christine then called the Coast Guard. The response, according to the accounts in the supplied material, was that the situation as described did not meet the threshold for an immediate deployment. No rescue boat went out. No aircraft was launched. And the hours continued to pass. Eventually, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office opened a formal missing person report. Nolan's father did not simply wait for the official search to begin. On the morning of July 5th, he took his own boat out looking for his son. The official search later expanded to include the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, National Park Service, United States Coast Guard, and volunteer search organizations. But the search produced another question. Horn Island was crowded that July 4th. Witness accounts described hundreds of people on the beach. Yet investigators and the family have said they have not identified anyone who publicly reported seeing Nolan in distress. That does not prove that nobody saw anything. It simply means there is still no confirmed eyewitness account explaining how Nolan ended up in the water. On July 6th, around 8:45 in the morning, a National Park Service ranger spotted a body in the water near the island's northwestern shore. The following day, the Jackson County coroner confirmed Nolan's identity through dental records. The swimsuit recovered with the body also matched what Nolan had been photographed wearing. The search was over. But the investigation was not. The question became much more difficult. How did Nolan get into that water? And how did he die? The state autopsy did not immediately answer that question publicly. The state autopsy report remains sealed pending the grand jury process, and final toxicology results have not been released in the supplied material. The family therefore pursued an independent autopsy. Dr. Roger Mitchell conducted that examination, and the preliminary finding was that the cause and manner of death were undetermined. Foul play could not be ruled out. That does not mean foul play has been proven. It means the independent examination did not establish a definitive explanation for Nolan's death. And now the case is moving into another important phase. Following a meeting between Nolan's family and the Jackson County District Attorney's Office, officials said the case would eventually be presented to a grand jury after the sheriff's investigation is completed. But there is something viewers need to understand about that phrase. A grand jury referral does not mean someone has been charged with murder. It does not mean prosecutors have announced that a homicide occurred. A grand jury reviews evidence presented by prosecutors and determines whether probable cause exists to move forward. So the grand jury is not the ending. It is another step in the process. And while that process moves forward, investigators still have several major pieces of evidence to examine. One is Nolan's phone. The family and law enforcement agreed to a joint forensic inspection so that both sides could examine the device under controlled conditions. That could become important because the phone was separated from Nolan when he disappeared. Another question involves disputed audio and video material that has circulated online. Some people have claimed they can identify specific words or voices in recordings connected to the case. But those interpretations have not been established as forensic fact. That distinction matters, because this case has already generated enough speculation. What investigators need now is evidence that can survive scrutiny. GPS records, phone forensics, autopsy findings, witness interviews, official records, and, perhaps most importantly, a reliable explanation for the missing time between Nolan's last confirmed sighting and the boat's 4:31 p.m. departure. That is the part of this story that remains unanswered. Katie has now spoken directly with Nolan's mother. The GPS has established where the boat went. The grand jury process is approaching. But none of those developments has yet answered the central question. What happened to Nolan Wells after he said goodbye? If you have been following this case, that is the part of the timeline I want you to remember. Not what social media says happened. Not what a viral audio clip supposedly reveals. Not what someone online believes. The question is what the evidence can actually establish. And right now, there is still a gap. A 90-minute gap. And that brings us back to the one piece of this case that no amount of speculation can fill in. The GPS records can tell investigators where the boat went. The phone can potentially tell them where Nolan's device was and what happened to it. Witness statements can tell investigators what different people remember. And the forensic evidence may eventually tell them how Nolan died. But there is still a missing piece between those facts. Nolan was last confirmed alive around 3 p.m. The boat left Horn Island at 4:31 p.m. Nolan was not on it. Everything that happened inside that window matters. Katie's account places Nolan intending to return to his friends. Warren Hudson's account says Nolan was asked to leave and chose to stay. Neither account, by itself, explains what happened afterward. And that is why the upcoming grand jury process matters, but it is also why viewers should be careful about declaring a conclusion before investigators have finished their work. The evidence may eventually support one explanation. It may also raise new questions. For now, the official record still does not establish who, if anyone, was responsible for Nolan's death. No individual has been officially named as a suspect in connection with his death, and no charges have been filed over the death itself in the material available to us. What we do know is that the investigation is moving forward. The GPS trail exists. The dispatch audio exists. The witness accounts have been documented. The phone still has forensic information that investigators and the family want examined. And the grand jury process is approaching. So the next major development may not come from another rumor online. It may come from the evidence. And when that happens, the question will be simple. Does it finally explain what happened during those missing 90 minutes? That is the question this investigation still has to answer. The question now is not whether there are unanswered questions in the Nolan Wells case. There are. The question is whether the evidence now being gathered can finally explain what happened after Nolan's last confirmed sighting on Horn Island. The timeline gives investigators a place to start. Nolan was last confirmed alive around 3 p.m. on July 4. At approximately 4:31 p.m., the boat left Horn Island. Nolan was not on it. GPS records later documented the boat's movements, including its return to the mainland at approximately 5:44 p.m. The records provide investigators with something valuable because they do not depend on someone's memory of where the boat was. But GPS cannot tell investigators where Nolan was. That is why the missing time remains so important. The accounts surrounding Nolan's final moments also have to be considered carefully. Katie McCormack eventually spoke directly with Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wanley. According to Christine, Katie said Nolan intended to return to his friends after they said goodbye. But Katie did not personally watch Nolan get onto the boat. Warren Hudson has provided a different account. He said Nolan was asked to leave with the group and chose to remain on the island, telling them he planned to get another ride. Those accounts leave an important question. Was Nolan deliberately staying behind, believing he would return later, or was there something else happening during those final minutes that has not yet been established? At this point, the available material does not provide a definitive answer. And that is where the forensic evidence becomes important. Nolan's independent autopsy resulted in a preliminary finding of undetermined cause and manner of death, with foul play not ruled out. That wording needs to be understood correctly. It does not establish that Nolan was murdered. It means the examination did not establish a definitive cause or manner of death, and foul play remained possible. The state autopsy and its supporting material could eventually provide additional information, but the state report remains sealed while the case moves through the grand jury process, and final toxicology results had not been issued in the material available for this story. That means there are still important pieces of the investigation that the public has not seen. The phone could also become significant. A joint forensic inspection was planned involving the family and law enforcement. The purpose is to examine the device and determine what information it may contain. That could include digital evidence relevant to the timeline. But again, until investigators complete that examination, nobody should claim to know what the phone will show. The same caution applies to the audio and videos that have circulated online. People have attempted to identify voices and names in disputed recordings. Some online theories have gone much further, naming people who have not been identified by investigators as suspects. That is dangerous territory. A person hearing a word in a recording is not the same as a forensic expert establishing what was actually said. And an internet theory is not evidence simply because thousands of people repeat it. This case has already shown how quickly speculation can spread. There have been false accusations against people who were not involved in Nolan's disappearance, and officials have warned about threats and misinformation connected to the case. That is why the next phase matters. The grand jury. The grand jury should not be presented as proof that a murder charge is coming. It is part of the legal process. Investigators first have to complete their work. Prosecutors then determine what evidence is appropriate to present. A grand jury considers that evidence and decides whether probable cause exists to move forward. That means the grand jury could become an important turning point, but it does not automatically answer every question. And there is another reason this case deserves patience. There are several different questions being asked at the same time. How did Nolan die? How did he enter the water? What happened during the roughly 90-minute period after his last confirmed sighting? Why was he not on the boat when it left? What can his phone tell investigators? And do the state and independent forensic examinations ultimately reach the same conclusion? Those questions are connected, but they are not the same question. The investigation has to answer them one at a time. For Nolan's family, however, these are not simply investigative questions. They are questions about a son who was supposed to come home. Nolan was remembered by his family, coaches, and friends as a young man with a future ahead of him. He had played football at Ocean Springs High School and later at Southwest Mississippi Community College. His coaches described him as someone who led through his actions and made people around him feel included. His mother has also spoken publicly about the kind of person she believed her son was. That is why the family has continued pushing for answers. And despite all the attention surrounding this case, the most important part of the story remains very simple. Nolan went to Horn Island with friends on July 4th. At some point that afternoon, he became separated from them. The boat left without him. His family later discovered that his phone and keys had returned to the mainland while Nolan had not. A search followed. His body was found the next morning, and the exact circumstances that led from that last confirmed sighting to his death remain unresolved. That is what the investigation has to establish, not what social media believes, not what a viral video suggests, not what one person's theory says. What can actually be proven? The GPS records are one piece. The witness accounts are another. The phone examination could provide another. The autopsy findings could provide another. and the grand jury process may determine where the legal investigation goes from there. For now, the most responsible conclusion is also the simplest one. Nolan Wells' death remains under investigation. The available evidence has established important parts of the timeline, but it has not publicly established exactly what happened during the missing window. And until that changes, there is no responsible reason to pretend that the case has already been solved. The next answer could come from the phone. It could come from forensic testing. It could come from a witness. It could come from evidence presented to the grand jury. Or it could reveal that investigators still have more questions to answer. What do you think is the most important unanswered question in Nolan Wells' timeline? What happened during those missing 90 minutes? Or what the forensic evidence may eventually reveal about how he died? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you want to follow this case as new verified developments emerge, subscribe to the channel. We will continue separating what is confirmed from what is still unknown.